All right, students, as promised, today we're going to talk about Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, who lived from 1646 to 1716, so right at the beginning of the 18th century. The picture you see in front of you is a picture of a tree, artistfully, if that's a word, drawn by yours truly, to sort of, I was thinking about an image that would maybe help us to see the main point of Leibniz's thoughts, and the main thing that he wanted to, determine what is the source of the so many different branches of human reasoning, right? So he lived at a time when the I don't know, knowledge was being compartmentalized more and more, where the natural world was being torn apart to try to understand its constituent parts and so on. And so you get the chemists studying molecules and atoms, and you get mathematicians studying mathematical truths and whatnot, and biologists and sociologists studying how societies work and all of this. So he was living at a time when there was a lot of transformation and change going on in the world of thinking. And his concern was to show, or to try to define or discover, I guess is a better word, the source. Right? Where is the common ground for our reasoning? And so that was his deal. I want to focus us in on three main points from this chapter in your text. One is a discussion of sufficient reason and what that means from Leibniz's thought. Second, and maybe it was a little difficult when you read it, his notion of monads. And third, the fact that we live in the best of all possible worlds. Okay, so these are sort of the three main points that we'll discuss in this presentation. So he mentions briefly, Kolakowski does, the principle of non-contradiction, so I thought I'd review it real quick. You remember, of course, that it basically is that a thing cannot both be and not be at the same time and in the same respect. You can't... contradictions don't work. They're not things, right? So as a principle of reasoning, the principle of non-contradiction is tremendously important. Okay, you can't say, for example, that I don't exist. I can't make that statement because obviously there's an existing something saying I. Or you can't say a square has 5 sides, because the very definition of square means a figure with 4 sides. So if I draw something like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's not a square. On no planet is that a square. All right. So, all right. Principle of non-contradiction. Good. Principle of sufficient reason, which is a new thing. We haven't really talked about that. Is basically saying that for everything, right? There is a reason for it, but in this, usually when we use this word reason, we mean like a cause for it, and it does mean cause, but it means cause not in the sense of efficient cause. Okay, an efficient cause is when the cause of the baseball flying through the air is the bat hitting the baseball. Right, so the efficient cause of the baseball flying through the air is the bat hitting it. Does that make sense? I hope. The efficient cause of a baby is the biological parents of the baby, right? The efficient cause of think about a pool table. The cue ball hitting the 8 ball and the 8 ball going in the pocket. It's the person with the cue stick is the efficient cause causing that chain of events to take place. Okay? What Leibniz is referring to with regards to the principle of sufficient reason is really this notion of the final cause. And so that really is more a question of purpose. Okay? So the final cause of the baseball would ask a question about, why does it exist? What is its purpose, right? Its purpose, its finality is to, be hit by a baseball bat, is to, sail over the Green Monster in Fenway Park, off the bat of Joey Votto. Final cause refers to the purpose of the thing, and so, the boat. You look at a boat. Okay, here's a boat. There's a boat. What's the purpose? What's the final cause of that boat? The efficient cause is the materials and whatnot that went to make the boat, but the final cause is to float upon the water. That's the final cause of the boat, is to float upon the water. Okay, I hope that makes some sense. Another important thing is that we may not always know the sufficient reason or final cause of the thing, but what Leibniz says is that there must be one. Okay, there must be a sufficient reason for this thing's existence. All right. He says, or Kolakowski says on page 115, the kind of sufficient reason we want can be discovered in eternal truths, truths which are necessary and whose necessity we can grasp, the axioms of logic and mathematics. These truths, the truths of reason, were not arbitrarily decreed by God. They could not have been different if God had decided otherwise. So Leibniz says basically these necessary truths exist in the very existence of God. Okay, and so therefore they are stable and hence necessary. All right, they are immutable. What does he say? Immutable elements of his being. They are not merely his whims. Okay, so just to summarize, for every thing there is a sufficient reason for it, not just for its existence, but for its purpose. So it's really, in a lot of ways, deals with the question of meaning. Moving on to Leibniz's discussion of monads, as a ground. What he was looking for was that ground, right? That ground of knowing, that ground of being, and so on. And so he defines a monad as a thing that is absolutely simple, having no extension and no parts. It cannot be born or die naturally. Leibniz sort of goes from the conclusion that there are particular things, right? But if there are, or complex things, I guess you'd say, but if there are complex things, there must be also simple things, things that are indivisible and unable to be taken apart. When I first sort of was studying this, the thought that came to my mind was like atoms, was Leibniz sort of hinting at, the existence of the atomic structure. And, I don't know what the state of the question is, how much can you divide an atom? Obviously, you can divide it into protons, neutrons, and electrons, but then are those further divisible, and are those things then further divisible? I don't know. But it just sort of was something that there's an analogy there, maybe. But so the ultimate monad, the ultimate simple and no-parted being is God, okay? Souls are also monads, and our bodies, he says, material things are also made up of monads, these indivisible little realities, if you will, that that are the constituent, I don't know, that they make up the universe. I don't know how else to say that, okay? And they all work together. All these monads are under, in some sense or another, the one monads with like a capital M, super monad, I guess, God. And so he orchestrates and harmonizes, would be a good word, all of these monads to work together so that we have a common experience. We are not that we can account for two people standing and experiencing a sunset and having a similar experience because it's orchestrated in some way by God, and it is according to His design and His purpose and His final cause or sufficient reason. Of course, that sort of leads, to the question that we've seen come up over and over again. Well, if that's the case, then are human beings free? Leibniz will say yes. But I want to use it as an opportunity to again make a distinction between necessary and contingent truth. Okay. Again, truth is, remember, the correspondence of a proposition to some fact, right? So the world is flat. That is a true proposition if, in fact, that statement corresponds to the fact that the world is indeed flat, which we know that to be a false statement, that the world is spherical. Okay, so it's certainly not a necessary or a contingent truth. It's not true at all. All right. So a triangle has three sides, or triangles have three sides, right? That is a necessary truth. And an interesting thing, if you look at it, is that the truth of this statement is contained right here in the subject of the sentence, or the subject of the proposition. A triangle, by its very nature, by its very definition, is a figure that has three sides. So the subject, this is the subject, right? And this is the predicate. It's what's being said about the subject. The predicate is contained in the subject. And this is called an analytic statement, okay? And so when, that's an analytic statement. Triangles have three sides. The subject contains the predicate. Similarly, if we look at the next statement here, that John is a man. The subject of the sentence is John, good, and the predicate is a man, is contained in the subject John. Okay, it's an unpacking, if you will, of the truth that is present in what we mean when we say John. All right, and so these are necessary truths. Okay, they are necessary truths. They cannot be otherwise. All right. Now, this last statement, Maddie spilled the milk. Maddie spilled the milk. The subject is Maddie. Is there something necessarily so that in the notion of what we mean when we say Maddie, is there something necessarily so that this is true? No. There's nothing about when we say Maddie, we say Maddie is a woman, then contained in the subject Maddie is the predicate woman. Okay? But there's nothing necessary about her spilling milk. Okay? We could say it's necessary that maybe she will spill milk because Maddie implies a human being who makes mistakes and so on and so forth. But there's nothing necessary. The predicate, right, the predicate does not flow necessarily from the subject. And so this is what Leibniz would call a contingent truth. All right, it's contingent upon whether or not it actually holds in a state of affairs in the world. So Maddie knocked over the glass of milk. Well, then this would be a true statement. Okay, and where it gets a little dicey is that from God's point of view, this is a necessary statement because He sees it as it is. I mean, so that Maddie spilled the milk, right, is necessary because God witnessed, if you will, Maddie spilling the milk. But in order for it to know that, we would have to have God's perfect knowledge. And so it's considered, from Leibniz's point of view, that is still a contingent truth. Okay, it does raise that big old question about, free will. And, what I've said, over and over about it, and it seems to be to some degree or another how Leibniz and Kolakowski deal with it, is that um, we, we are free, even though God does in fact know. He foresees, if you will, Maddie spilling the milk. But Maddie was still free to spill the milk or not to spill the milk. Okay? So, from her perception, from the reality of her existence, Maddie chooses this or that. And God's foreknowledge, God's knowing of that, does not necessitate that, or force, if you will, Maddie to do this or to do that. Okay? Uh, so that's, I hope that, again, you know how to get a hold of me if you have any questions, but um, that's necessary and contingent truth. And then Leibniz, admits that there's evil in the world. There's evil and suffering. We go to our constant, boogeyman, Hitler, and the reality of the Holocaust and the Jews who died under that terrible regime, as an example of the reality of evil in our world. But what Leibniz says is that, yes, God permits evil to exist in in the world. But he goes a step further, and he says that he only allows the minimum of evil. So God only allows the absolute minimum of evil in the world. And the good in the world far outweighs the evil. Okay? So we live, he says, and imagine all the possible worlds, right? Here's God surveying the universe prior to creation, and he thinks about all the possible worlds that he could create. It's really an infinite number of possible worlds, right? And he creates this one. He says, I'm going to make this one. And yeah, there's going to be suffering. And yeah, there's going to be brokenness. And yeah, there's going to be sin. But I am going to make it, because if God is all good, then the world that he made must be the best of all possible worlds because of his infinite goodness. So that the evil that is here is just a bare minimum of the evil that is possible. Because God wills that there only be a minimum of evil. And that the good is at its maximum. That he brings about the good, in a degree that far outweighs the evil in the world. And as Kolakowski mentions, that's all fine and good. That sounds great. But say that to a person who's, going through the horror of a Nazi concentration camp. Say that to a person who's dying of hunger. Oh, well, this is just the minimum of evil. It'll be okay, right? And so whether or not this is a satisfactory sort of answer to the question is open to, I think, discussion. Okay, but so that's Leibniz in a nutshell. All right, so we have the principle of sufficient reason. Be sure that you sort of understand that. His notion of monads, these indivisible, infinitely simple elements of reality that are brought into existence by God and in some way are orchestrated and ordered by him. Okay, and then the fact that, and then flowing from that, the notion of necessary and contingent truths and how that whole thing works with the predicate and the subject. And also this slide you're looking at right now, that we live in the best of all possible worlds, and his sort of view on that. There was one other thing. Why he raised the question that's the title of our book. Why is there something rather than nothing? And he says, because there must be a sufficient... If there is something, then there must be a sufficient reason. Because nothingness is easier than somethingness. Right? an object at rest tends to stay at rest. It takes effort to make something. So why is there something? Why would there be this effort put forward? Because there must be, according to Leibniz, a sufficient reason for it. There must be meaning and purpose to it. It's not just here, it has a purpose. Okay? And there's something interesting about that, I think. There's something very interesting about that. And something that is discernible, certainly, with, I think, through good reasoning, but also through the help of our Christian faith, that there is purpose and meaning to this world. All right, so for the rest of how much time you have left, I want you to, on page 122, discuss one of the questions. And just like you did last time, Morgan, if you would sort of, type up a little secretarial report of what was said and the different thoughts, and you guys can decide on which. There's two questions there at the bottom of page 122. Have at it, kiddos, and just a little quiz tomorrow over Descartes, Spinoza, and Leibniz. All right. You can email me or text me if you have any questions. God bless you guys.